So today we have Omeed Tabiei, right? Cool. He is, I want to say it. Actually, it's in your introduction. The coolest lawyer we have ever met. And so that's the cool part, and we will dive into that. What's behind it? I know that his background is really something that people will be interested in. So he's going to dive in a bit more, but he has been in, you have started your work in somewhere between U.S. Congress. You also worked in Hyperloop, or one of the lawyers in Hyperloop acquisitions or like formation. You've been in venture funding. You have done multiple, I believe, M&A as well, legal challenges, startup founders. I definitely have questions around that, like the AI space. So I'm sure, like you throw a rock, everybody's AIing it. But before we go over there, let's do an introduction, a justice over, like in your words, Omid, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Imran. Um, yeah, I'm the coolest lawyer ever. And that's how I introduced myself. The way that I started introducing myself that way was I just heard it from so many people. And like the first few times I heard people say, "Oh, you're the coolest lawyer," I was like, "What does that even mean?" And then I was like, okay, like that's so much better than, typically what lawyers get is like someone will say like, some kind of cheesy lawyer joke or something, and then I'm just like, ugh, roll my eyes. So like I started accepting the fact that people say that I'm the coolest lawyer. And what's behind that is like what I've come to make it mean is okay, like you think lawyer, you think suit. Like I'm not in a suit, obviously. I don't really wear suits. I'm more like a tech founder than I am a lawyer. Not that tech founders like are that much cooler. I mean, in the media, like for sure, after they make billions of dollars, they get abs and they become like very cool. Like we've seen Mark Zuckerberg really go through like a renaissance of his identity. He used to be kind of like this like super nerdy guy, but now he like rides surfboards and drinks beer and that kind of stuff. He's like a UFC fighter. So like
Yep.
billions of dollars for sure make you cool. I'm not that cool yet. I'm not that cool yet. I
Oh,
probably have like 999 more millions of dollars to go before I become
oh,
that cool.
I hear you. I do want to dive into a little bit more. So I do get your persona. I like it. I see because most lawyers I have worked with on the startup side or even legal side, they remind me of a professor who woke up on the wrong side of the bed and they just woke up and now they're like, I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna ruin this person's day. I'm
Mm,
gonna
mm.
tell him this is the litigation, this is the problem with GDPR, and how your company is gonna fail if you don't listen to me. That's one way. The other way is I've had only one lawyer who was like, hey, this is how you can mitigate it. So they're solutionist, they're problemist who talk about the solution later, but they talk about, hey, look, there's a boogeyman. Seeing in your career, this is why I want to dive, and I think this is the cool part we can talk about. But like, tell us, how did you get started? So there was something about, U.S. Congress that you
Yeah,
mentioned, and then you said some big names. So in your own words, so you can talk about it. Tell us how you started there, and then how
totally.
did you end up in startup world?
Yeah. Yeah, so the story is that I really wanted to be a public defender. I loved Law and Order growing up, the show Law and Order. Have you ever seen it?
Yep, yep.
Okay, cool. So loved Law and Order growing up, and my dad, like from when I was little, raised me. He made me like negotiate for everything. If I wanted anything, like I had to like negotiate for it. He'd be like, "You need to learn negotiation." He loved haggling. Okay, so like he would haggle with like everybody, and I'd be like, "Oh God, Dad, this is like so cringy and embarrassing." But now I look back, I'm grateful for that. So he loved haggling. He loved negotiating. He still does to this day. He's still around, so he's still very much like haggling and negotiating. So, made me negotiate for everything. So he from when I was very little, he said that I was gonna be a lawyer, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a lawyer. Blah blah blah. Loved Law and Order, and I thought I was gonna be a public defender. And I worked at the public defender's office for many years. I worked through
Mhm.
college and law school. I worked at the public defender's office. But what ended up happening was when I graduated from law school, they didn't have any jobs at the public defender's office. But my friend worked in US Congress. She was a staffer in US Congress. And she was like, hey, we have other open positions. The team needs help.
Hmm.
And so she gave me an opportunity to work in the US Congress. I worked in the US Congress for about 2 years as a legislative aide, both on the campaign side and on the legislative side. So, researching laws, blah, 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 writing up briefs, memos, that sort of thing for the senator, helping prepare for committee meetings and hearings and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And during that time, especially when I was on the campaign side, we would work with the business community a lot.
Hmm.
We would, fundraise from the business community. We would organize different events at the business community. And I would see these entrepreneurs in these communities, and like they would be so well respected, so well loved in these communities. I was like, wow, this is very cool. Like there's like something in business that's very interesting. And that's kind of like where my mind started to turn, where I was like, okay, like I'm not gonna do the public defender thing. And, Congress is interesting, but there's like something drawing me towards business. Like I'm very interested. My mentor becomes the chief legal officer at Hyperloop One because his brother was the primary investor in
Hmm.
Hyperloop One. He was one of the first investors, and him and Elon, the story goes, him and Elon were on a plane to Cuba. Elon shares the idea of Hyperloop with him on his private jet with this investor, and the investor is like, "Oh, I'll put 15 million into this business or 5 million or however much it
Yeah.
was." And that's how it started. And so his brother, who's a lawyer, becomes the chief legal officer at Hyperloop. His brother is my mentor.
Hmm.
He sees that I'm in Congress and he's like, come be on the legal team with me because, trust and relationship is very
Yeah.
important. So that's how I got started at Hyperloop. Literally in the first week, they put, Series A documents on my desk to raise $50 million. I'd never, seen that amount of money or anything like that in my life before. And I worked with outside counsel, one of
Yeah.
the best law firms in the world, WSGR, to help raise that initial Series A round of 50 million. And from there, that's it. Like once that happened, I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing ever. Like this is so cool. This is so
So,
exciting.
so tell us a little bit more. So, not about the Hyperloop, but like your experience when you were doing, as a lawyer, like you were, I think this was your first gig, I think for the startup, I guess.
Yeah, that was my first startup gig. Yeah.
What was your takeaway like? Plus, not that you landed any startup, it was the startup, right?
Yes.
Like you add something to it. It's like Elon Musk is right there, and he's like how he operates. Oh, did you have any time, like I guess any FaceTime with him or in a meeting? It doesn't have to be in person, but like
Yeah.
any of those fun
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, so to fill in the gap of the story, essentially what ended up happening was after this investor and Elon had this conversation and the investor put the initial capital to kick Hyperloop off,
Yeah.
essentially the conversation between them was the investor was like, "Hey, I would love to do this and I'll fund it." And Elon was like, "Cool, I'm too busy right now. I can't be a part of this. I have too many things going on, so you go do it."
Hmm.
And that was originally the understanding between the investor and Elon. But what ended up happening, we all know Elon is like we see, if you follow tech, you see he loves memes. He loves being the center of attention, right?
Yeah.
So what we all kind of understood in terms of what happened was Elon saw that Hyperloop was getting a lot of traction in the media. And so what ended up happening was he actually owned the trademark for Hyperloop.
Hmm.
And so he launched his own Hyperloop company that was paired with the Boring Company.
Yeah.
If you remember, like at that time, he was talking about the tunnels underneath LA, and he
Yeah.
had like built a tunnel, and he was like, "We'll just stick Teslas inside of this tunnel, and that'll be, blah blah
Yeah.
blah, whatever." So that's actually what ended up happening. So no, to answer your question, I didn't get any FaceTime with Elon. He had done a visit actually the day before I started at Hyperloop. He had done a visit to Hyperloop, but I missed that. So I didn't actually get any time with Hyperloop with Elon, like when I
No,
worked there. Yeah.
no, no.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. Like my friend, he worked at Tesla. He had some FaceTime with him, and he's like, "You don't want to be in front of his eyes. Just run, scramble." And I'm the opposite. I'm like, you know what? I'd rather be in front of him, rather have that heat. Well, again, then I'm a different personality.
Sure.
But this is very interesting. So, diving into more or diving to your next step. So after Hyperloop, where did you go? Like, did you?
Yeah, so Hyperloop was so I helped them grow from 60 employees to over 300 employees during the 2 years that I was there, about 2.5 years. And I helped them raise over $100 million, both their Series A and Series B. And um, help them get the test track in Nevada up and running, help them, get all of their contracts with their vendors into place. I helped build their internal legal infrastructure in terms of, we had so much money, right?
Yeah.
And so we were just hiring people, bringing on vendors. There were so many contracts moving. So I had to build that internal infrastructure database. We made everyone sign NDAs. Like we would get 5 to 10 NDAs, signed I would say like in a day, if not the week, so that's a lot of legal documents to manage and keep track of. But what ended up happening during the 2.5 years, like I became obsessed with tech. So I got, connected to all of the top investors. Like I had access to like this entire network that I had not had access to before. And I think what happens is like after you get into tech and you catch the tech bug, like I was like, I could do this founder thing. I can launch a company. Like,
Yeah.
so after that, actually three of us from the Hyperloop team came together and like built a completely different uh type of technology. This was like 2018. I started in Hyperloop in 2015, left in like towards late 2017. And in 2018, two of my teammates, also from the legal team, and I got together and we were like, we could totally be founders. One of us had like an idea. At that time, Bitmoji was very popular, the
Yeah.
app Bitmoji. And AI in 2018 was just starting to like become a thing.
Yeah.
And the conversation like was just like it was like a little murmur. The technology was like just starting to take off and become a part of the collective consciousness. And we were like, well, what if we took AI and Bitmoji and combined them using computer vision
Hmm.
to automate the creation of these like emojis that actually look like you. And so we raised a bunch of capital and launched that company, and that was like a whole crazy ride for a period of time, about a year and a half, like that I worked on that, and then I realized how freaking hard it is to run a software company. I learned truly like, wow, this is it. I think founders make it look easy, but it's not easy.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
I've done. I guess I've done multiple startups, right? Still waiting for my big hit, and there's I guess what I'm trying to say is like yes, it's not even hard. It's just that you have to do a lot of things. Though now the question is, what is that 4 or 5 things that you can do? It's not even that one thing, right? So it makes it very challenging as a role. But I totally hear you, man. Like
Yeah.
that's like and now when I see just a sidetrack, do you think now when we look at this whole new, I guess, Y Combinator and everybody's like, oh, I got accepted. Oh, quit my day job for doing that. I saw that for that company. I've even forgot their name. That's how important they were. But they, I forgot. Jeez, they basically forked something
Oh
of an
yeah,
open
pair
source.
AI.
Yeah. Pair AI, and I'm like, oh wow, they got accepted. I wonder why, right? And now, do you think that's a trend of, I don't know, like founders are people are becoming founders because it's cool, because this is accessible as a lawyer. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, as like like I actually consider myself to be a founder more than I do a lawyer. I think that's also one of the things that makes me cool is like I think you mentioned it, right? So it's like
Yeah.
the kind of crotchety professor is like one of
Yeah.
the is one of the archetypes of lawyers, right? So when
Yeah.
people think lawyer, they think crotchety professor that's going to shit all over whatever your idea is and tell you all the reasons why, you're going to die 15 different ways. Like
Yeah.
whereas like for me, I'm more like, cool, let's break shit, let's like make it happen. Here are the risks. Let's go into it knowing what they are, and here's, a bunch of solutions that we can come up with based on these risks. I operate more from a founder mindset. And so based on that, do I think that it's cool to be a founder these days? And do I think that everyone wants to be a founder? I think that what we are seeing now actually is no, I don't think that it's the same as, for example, there was a period of time in between, I think, like right around the Hyperloop time. Um, was a time where you could raise with a pitch deck. Like you didn't even
Oh,
have
yes.
to you
Yes.
didn't have to have a like a validated idea. We were seeing, it was just the start of these like ridiculous valuations for companies off of like vaporware, right?
Mm.
Where people were just able, and like what it was it was another version of the dot-com bubble. Like during the
Yeah.
in the 90s, the dot-com bubble, everyone thought that startups were where you could go, like it was the gold rush of the
Yeah.
90s, right? You just create something and, get rich. That's how everyone thought it worked. What we're seeing now is a bit different. It's not that um there's a correction that's happening. I don't think the interest in becoming a founder has waned, but I think making it through the like trial period of what it takes to really be a founder has significantly shifted, especially in the capital market as we're seeing
Mm.
right now. VC funding, it's actually super interesting between 2014, comparing 2014 to 2021, 2024,
Yeah.
there was about $70 billion in venture capital funding that was issued in 2014. And in 2021, there's 130, or 2020. Why do I keep saying 2021? 2024, there's $130 billion worth of capital that has been issued to date. But in 2014, there was something like 14,000 venture capital deals that were done. In 2024, there's only been 10,000 venture capital deals. There's 4,000 less deals that
Yeah.
are happening in 2024 than are happening in 2014, 10 years ago. And the number of pre-seed venture deals is the lowest it's been in 10 years. What does that mean? The data is telling us there's a larger amount of deals that are happening in
Hmm.
terms of capital issued, but a smaller number of actual deals and a smaller number of pre-seed deals. What does that mean? That means that most of the capital is being allocated not in pre-seed and seed. It's the raise sizes are increasing. So it's going to
That's
later stage companies, and the amount that's being distributed is much larger. And what
mm.
that what we're seeing is a lot of people wanting to be founders, and it's much easier to launch a company with these no code tools and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. But you're going to have to prove, can you get to profitability? Can you be a bootstrapper? We're actually seeing the market in general trend towards bootstrappers. You're not going to get investment unless you can show that you are a competent bootstrapper. And
Yeah.
most bootstrappers, if you can bootstrap, why are you going to go raise capital? You have like proven your own model. Why are you
Yeah.
going to go give equity away?
Yeah.
So it's super interesting.
I am 100% support of that. This is what even I experienced. So early this year, started something, then I left it, because of my personal reasons. And but one of the things I learned is when I was having conversation with these top tier investors, they're like, "Oh, we invest pre-seed." I'm like, "Great. what do you want? Like, what are you looking for? Oh, just, $1 million or 500K in revenue. I'm like, how the fuck is that preceded? And they're like, oh, at least have 100,000, 200,000. I'm like, ARR? Oh, yeah, that'd be nice. But, if you can scale it more, that'd be great. And that has been so consistent with I didn't keep count, but I'm definitely spoke to at least 10 or more VCs. They all entertain you. Probably you go into due diligence round, and then they're like, what we've learned is you need to have more revenue for us to show positive. And then I see on the opposite side, which you're right, they're investing in these companies, which exuberant amount. Like I don't want I think character.ai, great company, Google bought it, right? Tell me how's it different than you.com? You have these avatars, so there's a mega prompting that's happening, right? Let's break it down.
Mm,
When I think of it like, how is this worth? Yes, the founder background and the engineering team, get it. Are they worth $2 billion? I don't know about that. Yes, that person did invent something really great in Google. Makes sense. But there's something there. But when you look at the product character.ai, it's great. You have these avatars, you can talk to them. But tell me this, on GPT Store, if you go, everybody can build their own avatar. Everybody can do everything. It's kind of like a mega prompt. There's another product I've come across, and nothing wrong with that. But when you see a billion, 2 billion, X millions of dollars, like you.com, great product, is competing with Perplexity and GPTs, you can create. It's like a Costco. I'm not trying to be demeaning, but like in Costco, you go, you get everything and a lot,
mm.
right? So you go to you.com, you can pick any model when you pay for it, right? These are great tools, but my question is like, what are the investors or what are the founders pitching them then? Because I mean, I'm not able to connect the dots over there because like I don't have the number in front of me, shit, but I know they raised millions of dollars, I think 50 or
Mm.
$100 million. And I'm like, okay, so what was your pitch against GPT or Perplexity.ai?
But I think that this is all so, one of the conversations that's been happening for a long time is VC dying, right? So this is
Yeah.
this is like this is a conversation that's been happening for quite some time. And actually now what we're really seeing is a lot of venture funds are, especially emerging venture funds, are dying because there's no exits really happening. There's no IPOs. Capital is like drying up. It's harder to raise from LPs,
Yeah.
and that's actually why we're also seeing the amount of um, capital issued increase, but only for larger deals because
Hmm.
these newer funds that uh, would invest in earlier stage companies are dying off because the exits aren't
Yeah.
happening, the capital's not flowing, so it's difficult to, IPO market has been pretty much dead in 2024. And so, LPs are not investing in funds unless they're proven funds like, the benchmarks and the light speeds and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And those are the guys that do the huge capital
Yeah.
allocations. So, this conversation, the other reason, my hypothesis, is there's always been tension and friction between VCs and founders. And I
Yeah.
think founders' biggest criticism of VC is, yeah, all the VCs always say that they're pre-seed seed, but then it's the chicken or the egg scenario where they're not willing to allocate the capital for, the ideas unless there's like so much excitement and sexiness around it, which is one of the reasons why founders really hate VCs because it's like there's no methodology to your madness other than, oh, if this thing is like just seen as cool, then you're going to invest in it, even though like it could totally be like vaporware, which we've seen time and time again. And so this friction and this tension between founders of not really understanding what the VC methodology is, other than like some hype train fanboying,
I
has resulted in founders more orienting towards bootstrapping, and it gets to the point where like, why am I going to let you in when you didn't even bet on me for my last four companies, for
yeah.
example, and now I've made it, and now you want a piece of the pie? Pfft.
Would you say so Ilya, he left OpenAI. I've seen countless OpenAI ex-employees raising almost like, hey, this is how if I were to put in an analogy, it's like they come out, they go into a room, they're like, hey, I'm an ex AI. And everybody in the room, imagine it's a bar, everybody flocks over to them.
Mm.
And in the end, they're like, I was a janitor, but I was an ex-employee at OpenAI. Like, not to poo-poo that. Like, Ilya is great. I don't know what I'm trying to do, and I take these a little bit sarcastic because it makes it
Yeah.
more fun, but not to poo-poo anyone.
No,
But
I
Ilya,
love it.
he's a great mind that we have. He built ChatGPT. But do you feel the safe intelligence? That's a big round. That's a $5 billion raise. Definitely sure Mira Murati can also go ahead, raise for another startup. Maybe she will join one and so forth. Because we're on the subject of this huge raise and this fan point, the sexiness and everything. Is that madness still going on or craziness? Or do you think it's no, it makes sense, Imran, because Ilya had an experience building $100 billion startup. So rather
Yeah.
bet, you know?
So I think that there's like to zoom out in this conversation a little bit like, before
Hmm.
I address your point. So the other thing that has significantly shifted about the venture capital markets is um, that we're seeing most of the allocation in venture capital go to AI startups.
Yeah.
We're actually not really seeing, especially later stage, like Series A, Series B, there's almost no capital flowing outside of the AI space. There's little to like the majority of the allocations are happening in AI. Like if you look at like a strictly VC breakdown of, oh,
Yeah.
these are the recent Series A investments. It's like AI company, AI company, AI company, AI
Yeah.
company, AI company. It's like all AI companies. This company, Series A, raised, $20 million, $15 million, XYZ. So the venture capital space, of course, in true like criticism or qualm with the venture capital market is following the sexy train and investing all this capital into AI. And um and so like you essentially the question that you had of like I feel like the core of the question is it justified that these ex
Yeah.
um open AI people are going off and raising these large valuations? Do I think that it's going to pay off? Like,
Yeah.
what are generally my thoughts on the fact that anyone who can slap the title of like some prominent AI company onto whatever their next venture is, do I think that's justified? No, I don't. Like, I think that at the end of the day, obviously, what makes most common sense is, hey, why don't you have to prove that you can make your startup successful like the rest of us and not just like slap some title onto something and, raise a bunch of money off that? There's a great documentary on Netflix called Movie Pass, Movie Crash. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
Okay. So the premise of the movie is that there was this guy, Stacey Adams, and he was like he's like prominent black founder that had created like the cans for like movies that are made by black people.
Hmm.
And Movie Pass Movie Crash was his idea. And essentially, what happened was there was a board member on the board of MoviePass who saw what Stacey Adams was doing, had invested some money, and he was like, "Hey, there's these two Netflix guys, or there's this Netflix guy, Mitch Albom.
Hmm.
He helped to make Netflix successful. You should bring him on as the CEO of the company, essentially."
Hmm.
And it's what happened is they were able to slap Netflix's name onto MoviePass because of this guy who was ex Netflix and raise all this money and create all this traction and blah blah blah. What ended up happening was Mitch created a MLM model for the business, completely crashed the business, and then it turned out that Mitch, his role at Netflix was he was the distributor of the CDs when Netflix was doing the CDs. And it's
Wow.
like it's not like he was like quintessential to the business model of Netflix or anything like that. And so that is, I think, a perfect exemplification of, yeah, the janitor of OpenAI, for example, being like, oh yeah, I worked at OpenAI. Here's $1 billion.
Yeah, I just feel the reason I was saying this, for me, is because I feel very disappointed. There are a lot of founders. I personally know them. They're bootstrapping. Many of them have even said, Imran, you know what? I'm gonna eat less. I'm gonna live less, but I'm not gonna give my business to the, VCs. And if I do, I want to do it on my terms. I had three people who came on my podcast. They're like, I'm not even gonna raise pre-seed. I'm not gonna even raise a seed. I'm gonna make sure I make enough money from this thing, then go after and be like, I can only give you 10% or whatever, like very minority stake
Hmm.
at a high valuation. And why is that disappointing? Because the whole idea of VCs is to believe in founders, is to believe when nobody believes in them, calling them crazy, right? That's why you exist. You exist for two reasons. A, yes, you need to make your LPs money. That's fundamental to your business. But the vision and purpose of your business is specifically to drive more innovation. Believe in founders who are crazy enough to challenge something, and not every time you can prove something, right? So an example for that is if a company, so for example, Meta launched Orion, right? Those glasses.
Hmm.
They're great. I actually do wear these glasses and other glasses, and I'm like, that's my vision. I'm like, hey, you know what? That's where we need to go. And there are other companies out there who are actually doing it. Of course, Meta has the money and potential. My question is like, if any of the founder figured that out, hey, this is the future, and VCs never invested in them because, for X, Y, Z reason, many of the reasons that we talked about, and they invest in a company which is X AI, or let's say Humane, that clip thing that epically failed.
Hmm.
They raised 500 billion or $500 million, or I don't even know how much. And the only reason, like, I'm trying to make sense of it, but it doesn't make sense. That's what I'm trying to say. Are
Yeah.
you supposed to believe in the people who have not tried? Because if you have tried, you know this guardrail. But if you haven't, you're like, hmm, maybe I can go to the moon. That's what made Elon Musk happen, right?
Imran, I love it. You're an idealist. I see it. You're an idealist. Okay. And I think so many founders are, and I think that's like, that's pure. Like being an idealist is pure, and we need idealists that say like, hey, this is how it should be, of course. Like, and it helps like, keep the industry honest, in a lot of ways for people to like really stay connected to those ideals. I want to say two things here. The first thing is, this is a tale as old as time. Like this
Yeah.
makes me think of, I don't know if you know the story of Nikola Tesla, for example, one of the greatest minds of, you know,
AC.
this,
Yeah.
yes. And died penniless.
Yeah.
Died penniless, had all his ideas stolen by Edison,
Yeah.
never saw success. Um, and I think the story there is uh and the connection to this idea is brings me to my second point. My second point to every founder, which I learned the hard way as a founder myself and having, worked so for the rest of the story, I've worked at large law firms, I've worked with plug and play, I've worked with 500 startups, I've, worked with hundreds and hundreds of startups in my career for the last 10 years as a tech lawyer. Um, And what I tell every founder is don't start thinking about venture capitalists. Don't start thinking about VCs. If you have an idea, go find a way to make your idea successful so that you get VCs knocking on your door. That's where you want to be. Don't go knocking on VCs' doors and don't make VC your business model.
Yeah.
Learn how to pre-sell. Learn how to build audience first. Learn how to make your value proposition match your target customer. Learn how to reach your target customer. And pre-selling will be the most valuable skill that you can learn.
Yeah.
Before you even actually have a technology, get super refined on what your one feature is for the problem that you want to solve, or your whatever top three features, whatever it is. Sell it to the market, then bring it to the market and scale it without ever raising a single dollar of venture capital. And what will happen is all of the venture capitalists will want to be a part of whatever it is that you're doing because you don't need them. And that was also the thing that's most like annoying about venture capital too. The chicken
Yeah.
and the egg is the very nature of the chicken and the egg is when I need you, you're not there.
Yeah.
VC. When I need you, VC, you're not there. You won't invest a single dollar. When I don't need you, now you want to invest all of the money in the business.
Yeah. It's probably, you know, desperation. That people can smell through, hey, this guy needs money. And so I started my own syndicate. Just gonna pivot to a subject. So you're an
Yeah.
M&A, Laura, right?
Yep.
So you've done venture finance. So I started my syndicate, and and I stopped doing that. I tried it. I built it to like 65 LPs or something. Tried it from zero to, zero to 0.1, I guess. 65 means nothing in this world. And I was quickly realizing it's the amount of startups that reach out, they are not desperate, but I know why VCs are not investing in them.
Hmm.
I've had companies come to me to raise, not much, like 1 million, 500K, and I wasn't the only one participating. They had lead, folks. And one of my learnings was like, don't be desperate
Yeah.
and don't show that. And that's sad. I don't like that. Like you still have to imminent like confident, like, hey, I know my shit. If you don't give it, that's fine. Which brings me to why did I share this? Because I want to ask you, you've done, I'm sure, like multiple deals in your life. No, you have long life here, but like like in your past experience, you've done multiple venture financing deals, M&A. What did you see, or two, three traits that you saw in a founder that you were like, Imran, you know what? I played my role, but this what worked. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So two, three traits that I see in founders that yeah, either lead to successfully
M&A,
raising funds
yeah,
or exiting your business. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, unstoppableness is the first one. Like willing to break through a brick wall to make it happen, I think is the first trait of a successful either venture backed or exited founder. It is, we talked about it, it's not easy. It
Hmm.
is the equivalent of like Atlas, the myth of Atlas, like having to literally lift the world on the shoulders
Yeah.
for a startup founder. And sometimes that literally is the amount of effort that it takes to get momentum and traction for your startup, especially like, in the early stages. So I think resilience is incredibly important for venture financing in
Hmm.
terms of um, the founder that gets funded. If like you want to make VC your way that you find traction for your startup, you're going to have to talk to 1,000 VCs. You can't, talk to 10,
Yeah.
even 100 is not going to be enough. When you talk to 1,000 VCs and you're willing to go to the 900th and 99th VC with the same energy that you did with the first VC, with the same enthusiasm, with the same passion, that is the founder that gets backed. Because you will, if you never stop talking to VCs, you will find a VC that believes in your vision and wants to back you. It's just talking to enough of them. The resilience also comes into play in terms of if you, let's say you talk to 400 and you're like, you know what, I'm over this. I'm actually going to build. And what I would recommend for any of the like early stage founders out there who are thinking about launching a company, as I mentioned, don't make VC your business model. Like talk to them, build relationships
Hmm.
because you never know what those relationships can lead to. But go out there and test your model, not waiting for VC. And there's also resilience that comes into play there too, because your first launch likely not going to be
Yeah.
successful. Your 10th launch is more where you're going to like, see
Yeah.
there's going to be iteration, so on and so forth. You're really meeting the market where it is, but it's only through those launches that you'll be able to align with the needs of the market. And so resilience is required there too. It's the most disappointing thing to upload your code and launch it
Yeah.
onto the App Store, for example, and it's absolute crickets. You get zero downloads. Oh, sorry, that's my dog. I don't know if you heard it or not, but
No.
yeah, like so disappointing. Like to be like so excited and be like, oh my God, this is like gonna work, and then you hit launch and no one
Yeah.
is so expect that and know that that's likely going to happen. And you just got to keep launching. You got to break through that brick wall. So resilience, perseverance are incredibly important. I think another thing that is incredibly important for for founders is in the early stages of building your business, you have to wear every hat. You
Yeah.
are unless you have a co-founder, you are likely the coder, you're the CTO, you're the CEO, you're the CMO, you're the
Right.
CLO, you are all of those things.
Yeah.
And so, what is required is you probably, as a founder, are very talented at maybe one thing that you love doing. You really enjoy doing that thing, but it is the generalists that are the most successful, and you have to hone every one of those skills. And so, curiosity, openness, um, desire to learn, to improve. These are skills that ensure that a founder, while you may not be successful today,
Yeah.
you might be successful next year or 5 years from now. You can never let your thirst and desire and curiosity to learn and improve wane. You
Yeah.
have to be constantly iterating and optimizing your own knowledge.
I very much agree with this because it's more about like even with my podcast, right, that I'm doing. Um, one of the key things for me for this year was consistency. That was one of the key metrics. And so what I'm hearing from you is the same thing, is that you need to be keep doing it. Didn't get any response. Keep doing it. It's gonna compound. Maybe that compound is 0.00001, but slowly, yeah, have you seen that example? Like if you have a penny and it doubles every day in 30 days or something like that, it becomes, I think, 5 million or whatever, right? Or
Mm-mm-mm.
right. And so I don't know what that example was, if someone finds it and it's something else, but it was something around that, right? Compounding. I do agree, resilience, perseverance, and keeping keeping your goal on side. Keep doing it. You're not failing, you're just figuring out what didn't work. So at least you don't repeat those. And it's hard, like for our society to operate, especially in tech, because it's very competitive. So people are like, yeah, this guy failed. It's like, no, not really. He learned what not to do. So you don't do that.
And I'll tell you one more thing.
Yeah.
I will tell you what I think is found one of founders' biggest challenges.
What's that?
The flip side to curiosity and desire to learn. And one of the things that I think makes founders incredibly successful, which you mentioned, which is lack of desperation, like, hey, I got this,
Yeah.
confidence, you know?
Yeah.
I think that also it's a double-edged sword.
Hmm. Delusional or not,
And it's
maybe.
also it's also where you feel like you know everything,
Yeah.
and that kills your desire to learn and your curiosity. And I've seen a lot of founders, and what I often don't like is founders that come to me and they'll ask me legal questions, but they're not open to hearing the answer. And I'm like, well, if you know everything that there is to know about the law, then why are you even coming to
Oh,
ask me?
I like what you're saying here, Meets, because have you had that experience because you've in your like M&A or maybe the company's raising that you're giving advice that I think you probably have higher 90% chance is you're giving them advice or you're like, hey, this is what doesn't work, this is what I've seen, but they're not listening. They're not listening to hear, they're listening to reply. And they're delusional.
Yeah,
Like they somehow think they're Steve Jobs. Not everybody can be that, right? There's a what do you call a reinforcement, reality distortion, the reality distortion field that he had. That I get it. That's cool. That's nice. It works in many cases, but not every founder. Do you feel that some founders are really delusional and not open to hearing because their ego is so high, and they're like, I'm just gonna do it, figure it out, and then they fall hard. And I've seen those stories. I cannot name the companies, but they fall really hard on their face. And I'm like, not told you so. I'm like, hey, do you need help? Even then, they don't take it. Have you seen
yeah.
those
Oh
stories?
yeah, 100%, 100%. I'm trying to think of a situation. I mean, it often isn't necessarily even delusion sometimes. Sometimes it's just, well, I mean, it is delusion in some form or fashion, but it often is like either excitement or it's usually one of two things. It's either that this founder the reason why their ego is so big is because the nature of the startup journey is, as I mentioned, it's like Atlas having to lift the world
Yeah,
on the shoulders and break through a brick wall. They're like, listen, I figured it out up until this point. I'm the man. I have
yeah.
made the impossible happen. And so I know all of the things. And it's a lead that is a form of a leadership style, right? So leadership style is like very strong. I know everything. I'm infallible. Da, 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 da. Obviously, that has like its weaknesses there that result in its own challenges. The other
Hmm.
thing too is um, I think, we had this deal. It was an M&A deal. And I was actually representing the buyer in this instance. And what ended up happening was the buyer wanted to acquire this business. And the seller was unwilling to offer exclusivity for the transaction. It was an M&A transaction, the buying of a company.
Hmm.
And the seller was unwilling to offer exclusivity. When the buyer came to me, they were a first-time buyer. They had never bought a company before. And I told them, I was like, listen, you don't want to go into a deal without exclusivity. Like
Yeah,
the buyer could have or the seller could have multiple other buyers that they're
yeah,
talking to. And so that already is like a non-starter. Why are you going to spend money on this deal and hire a lawyer and all these things, and you don't actually even know if the deal is going to be yours?
yeah,
And he went and he talked to the seller. He's like, "Oh, my relationship with the seller is so good. The numbers, man, the numbers, it looks so good. I'm gonna take home 500 seller discretionary earnings every year. Gosh, like, can you imagine? Like 50K a month, like profit take home. Like, I can't let
yeah,
this deal go." Um, and he's like, I had a conversation with the seller and our relationship is so good, and he really wants to sell the business
yeah,
to me. Um, and I was like, all right, I have warned you. I've told you what my experience is with other deals where I've seen this. And then as we go on, it's like the broker is pressuring the buyer, hey, we need to get a purchase agreement out in 48 hours. I'm like, well, you haven't even done due diligence yet. How are we going to
yeah,
sign a purchase agreement? And he's like, oh, like, they said that we can do due diligence after the purchase agreement. And I was like, well, okay, let's just like slow things down a little bit. Something is not right here. Something is like very
yeah,
strange. And he's like, what do you think it could be? I was like, well, the numbers are okay, because we've done QOE, but there's a weird dynamic happening here with the seller and the broker. People are misaligned. They're saying one thing, I suggested to him, okay, well, let's just get the DD list to them. We'll start working on the purchase agreement. We'll tell them that we're working on it. They start putting a lot of pressure on the purchase agreement. And I was like, listen, man, now you don't have exclusivity. They're not letting you do due diligence. They want to just like lock you into a purchase agreement. These are all huge red flags. But
Yeah,
he's just so excited. He's so excited at the opportunity of the deal. And I think sometimes that too can be some blinder to obstacle to getting some deals done sometimes. So yeah, that's a little bit of insight. It's either excitement or it's some form of delusion.
that is crazy. Like I recently helped my friend to acquire a company. It's not in a startup space, but like a different space, like PE, I would say. And we went through the whole thing. It's like, hey, let's do the due diligence. Let me help you out with that, right? Let's figure it out. And then he had his lawyers back and forth. He didn't rush it. The deal took 4 months to close. It wasn't even large, right? So of course, it's also not conventional like startup. Uh, I'm surprised of what you're telling me. And do you think like this, because when you were talking about this, you reminded me of something, founders agreement. So you know how some startups start, they're not legal, just doing it together. Can you emphasize how important is it to have something in writing, whether it's email, text, Slack, because a lot of founders they don't do it. It becomes a black hole, lawsuit, whatever. I'm the one who is like black and white. I don't give a shit. I care about my mental peace, right? I need mental peace. Here's what you get. No hard feelings. It builds a good relationship. Have you seen those stories as well, where founders have
Oh,
not formed their companies, or they have? I'm sure you have, but like, any learnings? Because I want to extract learnings from you on those side as
totally.
well.
I actually have an hour-long webinar on YouTube that I did on co-founder agreements where I walk through all of the like challenges, pitfalls, like
Yeah,
crazy stories I've seen with founder agreements and then different approaches that you can take to founder agreements. So if you're listening to this, find me on Instagram or LinkedIn and message me co-founder and I will send you that hour-long presentation. And at the hour-long presentation, I also have like a free co-founder template that I
yeah.
give to people as well. So if you find me on Instagram at SaaSBizLawyer or on LinkedIn, just search my name. And if you message me co-founder, I'll make sure and send you the hour-long webinar and the template for free to anyone who's listening to this. So, but to answer your question, yeah, um, something happens that changes the nature of co-founder relationships when you get it on paper, and it gets serious.
Hmm.
And you start to see a different side of people that maybe you didn't see. That's why it's so important to have the co-founder agreement in place from the beginning,
Hmm.
because the co-founder agreement also will protect, in terms of buy sell. If you decide that it can't work out, there's various different approaches in terms of how you can approach things, who gets to keep the company, who walks, so on and so forth. And the buy sell agreement will address all of those aspects. But one of the biggest pitfalls that I often see in startups is like, when you're doing a startup, you're staying up late with your
Yeah,
co-founder, 2 a.m., you're building, you're launching, you're pushing code. Um, and it's exciting. There's no hierarchy. It's just like two people just kind of working together. But that's just not how a business operates. That's not how a business works. At some point, someone needs to be the CEO. Someone needs to, roles need to be taken into account. Oftentimes, what happens if the hierarchy conversation is not had early in the relationship is both people are operating on a similar
yeah,
level and both think that they're the CEO. So
yeah,
like, um, so that the conversation around, hey, these responsibilities are going to be yours, these responsibilities are going to be mine. Here's how we're going to make decisions. Here's who has the ultimate say in the decision making process, or here's how, if we can't come to a decision, here's how we're going to, come up with the ultimate decision. all of these conversations need to be had early because what you don't want to see is now once the company actually starts making money and there's something to
Yeah,
lose, people become much more attached to making sure that they don't lose that thing. The other thing that I often see with co-founders too is like, hey, you and I, we're going to build something. We're 50-50 partners. But what ends
yeah,
up happening is you might be the technical co-founder and I am, the business salesperson. We go out into the world. I'm the business salesperson. I've like lined up 10 customers who want to build, but the CTO hasn't written a line of code,
yeah,
since day one, but they're the 50% owner of the company and they're refusing to create anything, maybe because, they love the vision and it feels exciting, but they just, you know,
yeah.
like for whatever reason, they just aren't putting as much effort into the business as you are. But there's a 50-50 equal owner. I see that happen all the time. That's probably one of the biggest pitfalls that I actually see for early stage co-founders is they start out, one person puts all the effort, the other person doesn't put any of the effort. They keep having a conversation with the person like, hey, we need you to put effort in. The person never ends up putting effort in, but they're a
Yeah.
50% owner. And now you have to pay to get them out of the company, even though they
Yeah.
haven't done a minute of work. They haven't written a single line of code. So these are the things that you want to watch out for with co-founder agreements for early stage companies.
This is very true. I think I've seen those stories as well. Their founders are like, like when I was doing any startup I've done, I always like make sure it's simple and try to make sure like, hey, if I'm not doing something, accountability. Like, hey, I can't do it. So I'm not gonna be a blocker for you. I'm just gonna get out. That's my thing. You tell me what you need. Because the best thing I think founders can do is, of co-founders can do, have a good understanding. The most thing important, in my opinion, Omid, is the relationship. It's not the fucking money. Sorry, too many curses. No, I probably have to now figure out how to put a beep in this. But it's not about but it's reality. It's not about the money. It's not about the boss startup. It's about the relationship. That should be the priority. I think if the founders have that framework installed in their agreement and everything, that relationship takes a first priority. Nobody in the world will mess with you, whether it's investors, M&A buyers, and so forth. So I like what you're saying. I think having that transparency really helps. I know we are top of an hour. We had a really good discussion about a lot of things, but one thing I always ask all my guests, Umid, is looking at those things you shared about, hey, founders agreements, startups, the traits that you need, and the venture world, how it's going, because you've seen it from diverse different perspectives. What will be your one takeaway that you would like people, specifically startup founders who are, joining Antler, YC, or most likely they have been rejected. Not everybody can get into those, right? It's hard.
Mm.
Or not hard. Competition is crazy. What takeaway would you have for them?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you what I would love to see from founders more. And my favorite founders to work with are the ones that are curious. They want to learn. They come with questions. They come wanting to understand. I'm a resource. Like, use me as a resource. Like,
Yeah.
come to the consultations, come to the meetings with like 100 questions. I'll be happy to answer all of them. And this also the solution oriented founders are really the ones that I love working with as well in terms of like, okay, we are coming up in this challenge. Cool. Like here are all the things that we need to consider. And I have a one founder who always asks me like, okay, like based on all this, what's the one thing that you recommend? What's the solution here? How can we move forward? And I'm like, cool, perfect question. Here's what we can do. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Boom, consensus. So the one takeaway, it's kind of like soft skill, but it's like curiosity, desire to learn, want to improve, optimize self is how you'll become the best founder and how you'll ensure that you become a successful founder.
Yeah. This is spot on. I like this. And one thing I realized, I didn't talk to you about AI, but I guess like the other things that you talked about is very much more agnostic that impacts. Um, No, thanks to me for
Yeah.
joining the podcast. I know we went over, but this was very cool. And
Thanks, man.
that's pun intended as well. But no, no,
That's why I'm the coolest lawyer.
literally, I went in, I had a subject I want to talk to you about, and I like went in and like venture and everything. And I was like, this is so amazing hearing from a lawyer himself who has seen it all, who sees it, does it for a living, different, hopefully I hope founders and startups or VCs find it useful. In the end of the day, we all trying to make it work. So yeah,
Thanks for
thank
having
you.
me on.
Thank you, Mead.